So this week, I want to focus on chronic pain, which is a topic that is incredibly close to me because I had a period of my life where I lived in the world of extreme daily pain. My life for some time was dominated by a vestibular migraine condition, vertigo, and a persistent daily headache, which is essentially a throbbing headache that starts when you wake up and never goes away. And in this time, my world shrunk down to the size of a pea, and I spent many months barely leaving my room. And that period of my life was, without a doubt, the worst period of my life. But as anyone who has been through any extreme situation will know, it is when you are at your lowest, your weakest, and your darkest that you grow the most. And while if I was given a magic wand and a time machine, I would spare myself that experience, I also credit that experience as the most formative one in sculpting the person I am today, because I came out of it with a reservoir of wisdom and resilience that I know that one can't develop without wading through the rivers of hell. Truth be told, I don't particularly enjoy retelling this story, and that ties in a little to the Buddhist concept of attachment, where holding on to trauma in the past can keep us trapped in certain cycles of distress that can prevent us from fully embracing the present. But more than that, it's just a personal thing, and I've always found I'm happier when I leave my past selves behind and, as the Aussies like to say, just get on with it. Of course, I am open to the idea that revisiting the past can greatly help people. There's the Freudian and Jungian approaches and many other branches of psychology that would put forward that case. And I think my guest on Thursday may also have some ideas about whether or not my ability to silo memories away in the recesses of my mind is healthy or dangerous. But I'm just talking about what works for me. That being said, I'm going to tell my story regardless, because I know it does have the potential to genuinely help people. If my experience can help pull others out of the darkness, because extreme daily pain can get you to a place of serious darkness, then it would be immoral not to share that experience. So this is a story about the mind and how incredibly powerful the mind can be in terms of healing real physical pain and physical conditions like the one I had. Again, vestibular migraine, vertigo, fatigue, etc. And as someone who tried hundreds of different medications and therapies, none were remotely as effective as the work I did internally. But an important disclaimer is needed. You cannot will yourself out of cancer or tumors or blindness. You cannot meditate away a motor neuron condition. I'm absolutely not endorsing reading philosophy instead of going to a doctor. What I am saying is that for the pain and balance conditions I had, where scans were not picking up any tissue damage, I was able to heal myself completely. And many thousands of people do have migraines and various other unexplainable pain conditions, and I do truly believe in many of those cases, getting one's mind in order can often be as effective, if not more effective, than medicine. I can't speak for more serious disabilities or diseases. I can only speak to my lived experience. But I would also be surprised if these methods, while of course not having the ability to change cell structures, didn't at least make the world feel like a more bearable place for anyone wrestling with any condition. So, here's my story. In my mid to late 20s, I was in a very good space physically. I was extremely fit at a cardiovascular level due to a strong dedication to running and many other sports. And I was also just generally robust. I could be in a room full of sick people and not get sick. And I had the overall impression that serious health concerns were things for other people. I think I conflated physical health with overall health. And I assumed that if I was fantastically fit, that meant I was in a fantastic place mentally. For example, I very rarely slept more than 4 hours, because I'd wake up with extreme anxiety. But I figured I could offset that by doing more exercise to make me more tired so I could sleep more. That never worked, but the fantasy still allowed me to think that I could solve any problem through exercise. Then I got COVID for the first time, and this is where things started to unravel. My COVID experience was relatively mild. Izzy, my partner at the time, as many of you know now, my wife, had it too. We watched all the movies we were always talking about but never got around to, and we savored the time together. Frankly, it was kind of fun. How often do you get a 14-day holiday at home? I had the odd headache and dizzy spell. She had a few nights of fever. But after the 14-day compulsory lockdown, she was fully back to normal. And I found that my headache and dizziness seemed to linger. Now, a soft voice in the back of my mind was floating around the phrase long COVID. And that's a phrase I believe is very problematic, and I'll get to why in a minute. But the louder voice in my mind said, it sometimes takes 4 weeks for people to get fully better from COVID, so don't be too stressed. So I put my fears aside, and 5 days after my 2-week confinement, I went on a hiking trip with my dad. We walked about 130 kilometers, 80 miles with packs, and I just munched on Panadol and ibuprofen and got through it okay. But when I got home, I got a really bad flu, way worse than my COVID experience. And coming out of that, I really felt like I'd taken a big beating. In the space of just over 3 weeks, I'd had COVID, I'd done this huge hike, I had the flu, and I felt properly wrecked. I knew my body needed some time, so I did all the health things. I took 2 weeks of sport and alcohol, I drank vegetable smoothies, I took vitamin supplements, but I didn't get any better. And over the next couple of months, I found myself deteriorating. I was constantly tired. The headaches were getting worse, and I was having quite significant dizzy spells. Like I'd be walking to the shops and just suddenly find myself forced to sit down. I kept trying to go back to soccer and having to come off after 15 minutes. I kept trying to keep to my running schedule, and I'd have to give up a kilometer in. I'd be driving and suddenly need to pull over. I was taking the max dose of Panadol and ibuprofen just to operate, and I started to think that something was really wrong. I asked myself, could I have long COVID? I went to some GPs. They set me up with dizziness meds and some stronger headache stuff that you can't get over the counter. But nothing worked, and in fact, I kept getting worse. So I eventually went to a neurologist and then a cardiologist, and I did blood tests and scans. And they said, well, you don't have a brain tumor and your heart looks great. We can't find any evidence of anything being wrong other than your white blood cell count is way down. And the dizziness, the tiredness, the headaches, that all seems to be consistent with what we know about long COVID. So long COVID is what we think you have. And I said back to them, well, what does that mean? And they said, we don't know. It's too new a condition. And I said, well, how do we treat it? And they said, we don't know. It's too new a condition. And I said, well, how long am I going to have it? And they said, we don't know. It's too new a condition. Now, I do want to say, my doctors and my specialists were always kind, and they always worked hard to get me better. They used the information available to them at the time to come up with a diagnosis with the sole intention of helping me. But being told what I was told, the way I was told, was, in my opinion, an unmitigated disaster. And a disaster I saw play out again and again as my condition became more severe with many other people in my support groups over the next year. Of course, in hindsight, there was another perspective available. Not everyone gets scans back accompanied by the sentence, you're not going to die. There is an opportunity for gratitude here. There is an opportunity for relief here. And now that I'm older, I understand a little better that when specialists say we can't find anything on the scans, That, to them, is good news. But to understand why this was at the time the worst possible thing I could have heard, you have to spend a moment in my mind. I was a young, fit man who had no experience with the medical system, who had practically never been sick before. And what I was told was that I had a very vague but serious disease which could encompass almost any symptom and had no clear or tested route to recovery. They couldn't even say that it wasn't going to get much, much worse. What I wanted from the scans was not to be told I wasn't dying. I wanted answers on how I could get the life I had just a few months ago back and go back to being the guy who could drink 12 beers and still play 90 minutes of soccer the next morning. I wanted my perfect life back because my anchor point was perfection, and anything less than perfection seemed very unfair. And there I was looking back at these doctors with a worsening condition and not knowing how long I'd have it for, or if it would continue to get worse. This was early on, and there was close to no information on long COVID at the time. Doctors didn't know of any recovery stories. So all of a sudden, the future I had mapped out for myself was severely threatened. This is something that happens to everyone when they receive bad news. You are suddenly forced to deal with the margin between how you thought you were going to spend your time next week, next year, or next decade, and a reality that is saying it's not going to go how you thought it would. It's human nature to think this way, and something we're working towards getting better at navigating in this podcast is not thinking that way. But at the time, without those philosophical and mindful tools, the only information I had was that I was sick and getting sicker, with a disease that nobody understood and where nobody could help me. And so the illness began to take the shape of whatever my imagination could come up with. My unconscious mind was left with this blank canvas to paint whatever dark picture of suffering it wanted to. And again, this isn't to say I wasn't having seriously debilitating headaches, migraines, and dizziness. The pain was visceral and real and penetrating every aspect of my life and making it so that I couldn't do the things I loved doing. But I had no idea of what to look for, so I looked for everything. This is the way the untrained mind works. Everything became evidence that I was getting sicker, not healthier. And at the same time, the Western medical system, which I had never courted but always revered, which I had assumed could emancipate me from any degree of suffering when needed, wasn't able to give me any reason to hope. I was just told to find ways to cope and to rest. And so the months went on, and my life became smaller and smaller. I gave up sport. I gave up alcohol. I gave up caffeine. I left parties early. I turned down work. And I was willing to give it all up in an attempt to recover before this big trip I had planned. Izzy and I had this amazing hike booked in the Northern Territory through this national park where only like 10 people are allowed to do it at any time. And there's all these spectacular tropical waterfalls and rivers, very exclusive, and we've been looking forward to it for over a year. This was one thing I knew that no matter what, I was going to find a way to do. And one night, we're walking to our neighbor's place for dinner, just down the road, and I have to sit down and take a rest. And Izzy, who's been fantastically caring during my downward spiral, but is also much more rooted in the real world than I am, says, if you can't even walk to the neighbors, how are we going to do this hike in a remote national park with no access to help in the middle of the outback? So we gave up the hike, but I push her and I say, well, let's do some car camping around Darwin. Let's take it easy. She's skeptical, but I keep the pressure on and we go. We get there. I'm a mess. I can't drive. I can't even help set up the tent. On day 2 of 7, we book a flight back to Sydney, and I am now not only sick, but I have this incredible feeling of embarrassment. I am completely and utterly disgusted by my own weakness. So I go back to get more tests, and my bloods have gone back to normal. And so the medical consensus became, well, you had long COVID, but you don't have that anymore. But what's happened is it's triggered a vestibular migraine condition, and you're going to have to just manage that for the rest of your life. And I said, well, it's not manageable. I can't do anything. And the doctor said, well, there are things we can try. So then over the next few months, I'm given steroids, benzos, 400 different drugs ending in tryptin. I'm going to migraine chiropractors, nutritionists, physical therapists. My entire life is just appointment after appointment, drug after drug. I can't even drive myself to appointments. I can't even walk around the block. It just all hurts too much. And I've started having multiple panic attacks throughout the day and night. I can't get a wink of sleep despite taking significant sleep medications. And I realize now, for the first time in my life, I'm seriously depressed. A few more major personal events occur that start to break me. At my best mate's wedding, I'm in too much pain to hear the vows. I miss another close friend's bucks night, some family events, things I didn't just want to be present for, but I wanted to be running. I wanted to be the main player. I wanted to be the life of the party. And instead I was watching the party from my sad little corner at an empty round table, drinking a soda water that someone had awkwardly brought to me. And this feeling of shame started to escalate because nobody knew how to navigate or talk to the person I had become. And I got sick of being reliant on other people. I got sick of being a burden. I was sick of being pitied. I was sick of watching other people have fun while I was miserable and in a level of pain I knew they didn't understand. And I decided I'm just not going to engage with other people anymore. So I tried to stop seeing people, and I stopped working, and I just sat in front of the TV. And I found I could sit in front of the TV for an hour or so before the headache gets too bad. So I'm just rotating from TV to lying in bed to TV to lying in bed. Because the pain and the dizziness is so severe, I get obsessed with this idea of triggering migraines. If I walk too long, I might trigger migraines. If I go in a lift, if I read too much, if I look at a screen too much, if I eat the wrong thing, if I twist my neck the wrong way, basically any type of exertion, no matter how minuscule, starts to terrify me. So I cut everything out. One day I wake up feeling determined, and I decide to prove to myself I can still walk around the block. I walk down the hill to the bottom of my road, and it's hard. I turn around and I look at the hill looming above me. The gradient suddenly seems impossibly steep. I take 2, 3 steps, wobble a little bit, take 2 more steps, and fall over. And I realize I can't make it back. So I crawl on my hands and knees in public, in broad daylight, up the hill. It was so humiliating. It was the lowest I have ever felt in my entire life. I crawled up the hill, through the door, I crawled down the hallway and up the stairs, and I crawled into my bed, and I put the covers over my head and decided to give up. Then and there, I decided I'd spare Izzy a life with someone so pathetic. I was going to move to the bush and live a quiet life alone where I wouldn't be a burden to anyone or have any responsibility. I'd just lie in bed and listen to audiobooks and take a disability check and eat canned beans for the rest of my life. And thankfully, that's as bad as it gets for me. That's the vertex of the parabola. That's the origin story. But after this point, the redemption story begins, and I start to follow the narrative arc of any romantic comedy worth its salt, where despite the guy hitting rock bottom and all hope being lost, somehow, through a series of incomprehensible magical signs from the universe, the story ends in total perfection, a healthy, happy guy who marries the girl of his dreams. So how do we get there? Well, here are the secrets. and I promise they are completely free from voodoo magic and arcane mysticism. In these dark weeks where I wasn't leaving the house, about 3 or 4 very important things happened in quick succession. The first was that Izzy discovered the Curable app. And if you've never heard of this app and you suffer chronic pain of any kind, please do yourself a favor and look into it. And I want to be very clear, I'm not sponsored by them. I just think they're doing a really good job of what they do. They have thousands of recovery stories from pretty much any pain condition you can imagine. And the recovery stories stem from the recovery exercises they promote. But these exercises are not exclusive to them. They're just a easy and practical embodiment of a general mind-body connection philosophy, which is essentially the idea that your mental state can influence the real physical pain you experience. There are plenty of other books out there that unpack this idea, notably one by Dr. John Sarno called The Mind-Body Prescription. But I just thought the Curable app did a great job at making this information accessible and easy to digest, which is what you want when you have a 24/7 thumping headache. And it didn't fix me overnight, but here's what it did do. For the first time, I was introduced to a landscape where people seemed to be recovering from pain. And it didn't seem to matter what the root cause of the pain was. Migraine, sciatica, lower back issues. Curable showed me the first body of work that wasn't saying, we don't know, we don't understand, you're stuck with this. And as I researched their philosophy further, I saw there was an entire world of people saying, whatever pain you've got, you can beat it. So suddenly, I felt like I had something to fight for. And that really matters. The second thing that happened was I started with a new neurologist who confirmed the diagnosis of a vestibular migraine condition, but had a very different philosophy about medication. She still wanted me to try various different migraine medications, but wanted to substantially thin out my medicine cabinet in general. She simply said, you're too young to be addicted to benzos, so you're not getting any more. And she said, I think a lot of why you're getting such bad constant headaches is because of the quantities in which you've been taking Panadol and Nurofen for nearly a year. I think you've developed a dependency. I think you could be waking up with a splitting headache because you are withdrawing from painkillers overnight. And I think you'll experience less pain long-term if you wean yourself off them. She was also so tough in such a beautiful way. I told her my sob story about crawling home, and she was completely unmoved. She just said, tomorrow I want you to try that again. And I said, you cannot make me do that. I can't bear having to crawl in public. And she said, will it kill you if you have to crawl? And I said, no, I guess I won't literally die. And she said, so, if you fall, you fall. If you crawl, you crawl. If you trigger the worst migraine of your entire life, so be it. If it's the worst day of your life, so be it. You've survived these kind of things before. You've survived the worst day of your life before. You'll survive all of it again. She said, stop tracking everything you're eating. Have a beer now and then. Start taking all of this a little less seriously. Don't live in fear of pain. Live the way you want to and accept the pain. And I had never considered that someone could live like that. I assumed crippling pain was crippling. But she told me I could just be stubborn in the face of pain. And from then on, I had a slightly different mindset. I said, okay, I'm going to try and walk around the garden. And if I trigger a migraine or fall over, that's okay. The third thing that happened was I started working with a dizziness therapist. And frankly, therapy has never been something I've been attracted to. Again, this might be for the wrong reasons. But I did love working with this therapist, and I have to give her a tremendous amount of credit in my recovery because she explained the science of what was happening to me. When I first rocked up, she showed me a diagram of the brain and said, you're living in a constant state of fight or flight. you're constantly looking for signs a migraine might be starting. Everything is a threat. So you're living in your amygdala, and this is sending shockwaves through your sympathetic nervous system. And it's in overdrive, and it's sucking all this energy away from basic bodily functions, including the ones responsible for balancing. This is why you're falling over. All of a sudden, I understood what was making me dizzy. It wasn't the vague cloud of whatever the hell long COVID was. It wasn't the vestibular migraine attacking my inner ear or anything else like that. It was an extreme stress response. And knowing that, when I got dizzy, what started to go through my head is not, I'm pathetic, I'm dying, is this going to be the rest of my life? How long will this dizzy spell last for? I started to say to myself, you are having a stress response. When you calm down, you'll be able to walk again. And each time I went through this little dance, my next dizzy spell would be just a fraction less severe, just a fraction shorter. The final major breakthrough was a total dedication to mindfulness and lifestyle philosophy, much of it rooted in Buddhism, but also in Stoicism and moral psychology. I've been meditating since I was about 20, 10 minutes a day, kind of inconsistently. I knew it made me feel relaxed, but I didn't quite understand the core ideas behind the project. And I had read a lot of philosophy, but I'd never spent that much energy trying to apply it. The deeper wisdom of selflessness, impermanence, the illusion of free will, etc., etc. But during this illness, I was meditating over an hour each day just to stay sane. And I started to get better at understanding that, in fact, I am not my thoughts. Thoughts are neurons firing. They're a sensory experience, the same way we hear a bird chirp or feel a gust of wind on our shoulders. Thoughts are not reality. They just float through consciousness like any other feeling. And getting better and better at watching my thoughts helped me in every aspect of my recovery, because I was able to change how I experience different situations. If I was having a panic attack, I'd actually notice I was panicking. I'd say to myself, Jonah, you're panicking, instead of truly believing that I was about to asphyxiate. And I was able to be in the thrusts of a serious migraine. And instead of saying, this pain is unbearable, how unfair that this could be the rest of my life, I could just watch that thought and notice the negativity, but not engage with it. Replace it with the idea that there's an impermanence to this kind of pain. The worst pain is going to pass. It always does. That however much pain I'm in right now won't kill me. And how lucky I am that I'm not wrestling with a condition that will kill me. And that mentality, of course, ties into what I was learning through a gratitude practice, which was understanding that actually, despite everything, I was still a very fortunate person. I had wonderful family and friends, and I live in a beautiful city, and I have people to take care of me, and I could have all of these same symptoms, but be in the middle of a war zone or in total poverty. And mindfulness helped me enjoy the little everyday moments, even while I had a raging migraine. I didn't need to be doing all the things my friends were doing that I couldn't do. Partying, playing competitive sport. I started to become happy enough just watching the clouds and savoring the smell of fresh bread. I had this sense that even if I never get better, life could still be spectacular. And with all of these things combined, suddenly I'm piecing back little parts of my life. I started with 1 lap of the garden, and then 2, and then 10. And when I could walk 10 times around the garden, I went back to the hill that I had had to crawl up. And I walked up it easily. And at the top, I burst into tears. Because all the signs were there that I was going to beat this. I returned to work. I went to social events. I said, I'm going to go to this dinner party. And if I have to lie down, then that was okay. And often I did have to go lie down in the middle of a dinner party, but at least I was there. And I made these little breakthroughs every week that I was taking note of. My first time back in an elevator, my first time walking for 10 consecutive minutes, my first time having caffeine, my first time playing tennis. There were slip-ups and flare-ups and bad nights, but every week I was better than before on average. There were still things to manage, but I was managing every single one without medication. No painkillers, no anxiety medication, no sleep drugs. Just an internal monologue that cared about me and wanted me to get better. And now, there's no progress to monitor. I'm just living my life, and I very, very rarely even think about the time I was sick. I'm back to my exercise addiction. I'm running half marathons. I even have a good chance of beating the times I clocked before any of this happened. And I just feel in control. Most of the time, I can see anxiety as anxiety. And I know I don't have to live it. I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. I'm not enlightened. But I'm a far, far more resilient person than I was before any of this happened. Now again, we have to stop and reflect. I am very lucky that this route of recovery was available to me. Many conditions are terminal. Many conditions are genetic or have some immutable property that means that people who have them do just need to find ways to manage and cope and will never experience the total physical freedom I have recovered. I had something that could be beaten, and that's not the case for everyone. All I want to do is draw attention to the idea that I didn't know vestibular migraine could be beaten when I had it, and I was told by medical specialists whose area of expertise were the very conditions I was suffering from that I would probably have it forever. And there, they were wrong. So that's why I'm telling this story, because I do believe there are some percentage of people out there who have conditions like I had, who are suffering more than they need to be, and who do believe their situation is hopeless. And for those people, I want my recovery story to be a potential point of hope. Had I found the different sources of information that led to my turnaround earlier, I think I would have gotten my life back earlier. Had I never found this information, I fear I may still be in my room today, believing that my life was stolen away from me. So if you know anybody suffering with some unexplainable pain, shapeless chronic condition that has led them to believe that the richness of life is something to be enjoyed by other people, please share this with them. It might be their turning point. It might not be. But they will agree, if they have truly tried everything like I had, they have nothing to lose by listening. Overall, what I believe now is that the pain was very real, and the conditions I was diagnosed with were very real. But where I was wrong, and perhaps some of my doctors were wrong, was the idea that the recovery from these conditions start with the body. That recovery starts with changing chemical compounds from A to B using medication. That recovery is built upon rest. But rest can very easily become avoidance. The truth is, the brain is old technology, and it uses pain as a mechanism to protect us. It wants us to be safe so we can carry out the human mission of reproduction. And we're safest when we're lying in bed in a dark room hugging a pillow. That's exactly where a migraine sends you. But the modern human has grander dreams than reproduction. We want to experience everything life has to offer. So I needed to train my brain that the pain signals it was sending weren't going to work on me. That no matter what it threw at me, I was going to get out and live the way I wanted to. Painkillers were just band-aiding over the problem. But continuously not giving myself up to the anxiety of leaving the house, of not taking the dopamine hit of staying home with less pain, but instead embracing the wonder of the world, eventually trained my brain to understand that the pain wasn't having any effect on my behavior. And so eventually it got the hint and decided to give up sending the pain signals. Although the brain is old technology, it is also plastic and Pavlovian, and it will listen and adapt if you find the right way to communicate with it. And I've come out of this thing with the knowledge that I'll never let an illness rule my life again the way it did. And I know I have many challenges and a lot of suffering ahead of me. And I know one day I may get told I have something unbeatable, really unbeatable. But I also know even in that situation, I have a toolkit that will provide a foundation to live the best life available to me. As my neurologist said, if you fall, you fall. If you crawl, you crawl. But it's better than living in fear of pain. I'll never let myself be ruled by anxiety and fear again. But if I want that to be the case, I have to be careful. Now, a couple of years after my recovery, I sometimes find myself getting complacent. There was a time at my worst where I said to myself, if I can just get the ability to walk around the garden without pain, I'll never complain again. That's all I need to be happy. These days, I sometimes find myself going for a 2-hour Saturday morning cycle, plonking myself down at a cafe and then whinging when my coffee isn't served hot enough. Time is healing, but ironically, sometimes it's too healing. It can allow you to forget the most important lessons you've learned. So despite having experience with all these different wonderful philosophies that gave me my life back, I have to be constantly mindful of my behavior and make sure I'm always practicing and always studying, because I know firsthand what happens when you let your mind get out of control. Thank you for listening. I hope for someone somewhere this has been helpful. And on Thursday, I'll be in conversation with one of the most important voices in chronic pain. This is the Overexamined Life. See you next time.